So I'm pleased to have with me someone I've been a huge fan of for years. He's known for writing and performing in the Rocky Horror Show, and as well as being the original maze master in the Crystal Maze. It's Reckless Rick, aka Richard O'Brien. Hello.
Hello.
Where did that nickname come from, Reckless Rick?
It was on the spur of the moment. I was standing on that deck before the Crystal Dome, and the cameras pointed at me, and like anybody else, I was just as nervous as anybody else would be when the cameras were pointing at me, because I'd never been in front of a camera as myself before. Because when you're acting, you're in character. There's other people's lines, generally speaking, and you're performing in an act of artifice. And when you're playing, when I did Crystal Maze, I had to step into myself and be myself in front of the camera. But so and nerves and whatnot. And I just came up, just spat, and I said, "Hi, Reckless Rick of the Crystal Maze here." Why I'd got no idea, but it seemed quite funny at the time. I don't know. It's a lot of the Crystal Maze was spontaneous. You sort it out afterwards. For instance, on the Crystal Maze, all that stuff of me talking to camera, looked to the audience at home, when their backs were turned. I never spoke to the audience while they were facing me, but as the minute they were engaged in the game and away from it, I could go to look at one of the cameramen, because they were outside. First of all, the cameraman said, "What are we supposed to be shooting, Richard? The backs of their heads." And on that first series, of course, the producers were all in the control van looking at these different monitors of all the different cameramen, and they were watching the game, not the outside of the game. And there was one of the cameramen outside, two cameramen outside, ready to pick them up when they come out, or go when they come out. And his name was Jeff, and I'd say, "Come over here, Jeff. I haven't been well today. Oh, I've had a dreadful day. Mumsy's been, blah, 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 blah." And I just started nattering until I made him laugh. And I'd see the camera start to shake on his shoulder and go back to the game. They never knew I was doing that on that first series, because they weren't watching me. They were watching the game, quite rightly. And when they went to edit that first series together, they discovered this outside stuff that I was doing, and they kept the best of it, that was entertaining, and they got rid of the rest because I was babbling. And then the next series they said, "We want more of that," actually, because what happened was, looking directly into the camera, you break through the fourth wall, and you go directly into the sitting room where people are, and they feel as if that you're talking directly to them. And it makes a connection. And the strange thing was also, it makes them complicit, me and them complicit against the players, and it became me and the audience, looking at the players, as opposed to just the audience looking at the players and me. And it was just another happy accident. In fact, there was a chap, the House of Cards actor, Scottish actor. I've forgotten his name for the moment. And I met him. We worked on a movie together in Australia called Dark City, and we went out for dinner one evening. He said, when I was doing the House of Cards, he said, I channeled you doing the Crystal Maze, talking to the audience at home in that manner. And I said, "Well, that's very interesting, because I almost channeled Frank Finlay when he was playing Iago in that movie with Olivier Othello, because that was marvellous. The asides on stage would have been to the audience, but on film we've got the action going, and suddenly Frank turns around and looks straight into the camera and starts to talk about Othello over there, and it becomes him and us, and it's very powerful."
The asides to camera were fantastic, and I think is what made the show that little bit more different than just a game show, to something that you almost believed was an actual world that you lived in.
That was essential. That kind of was essential. We of course, once again, it is all make believe. going through the we didn't understand. They did the demographic before the show was done. Crystal Maze, the producers had already done Treasure Hunt and Challenge Annika, so they knew what they were doing as far as game shows were concerned. And in fact, Bullseye as well was one of their early ones. So they kind of knew what they were doing in terms of giving game show entertainment to the public. And knew their business, and they did the demographic of who they thought their audience might be, it might appeal to, and they got that right, but they hadn't factored in children, and we had no idea that this show was going to appeal to kids, and it did big time. And in fact, you know, that after the first series, we became very much aware that the children were into it. And so the second series came around, and they said, we should do a celebrity, you know, Christmas show for this, you know. And we all thought, you know, what do? You start out with a wish list for your celebrities, and you finally wind up with Jeremy Beadle or somebody. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, your ideas start good, but you finally wind up with, you know, the B list as opposed to the A list. And then someone said, we should do it with children. 20,000 children applied for that first Christmas show, and we're going to pick 6 from them. And my friends were coming up, and they got little kids, and we're going, oh, Richard, you don't think, you know, don't stop it, go away, just leave me alone. I'm not becoming involved in this. There's 20,000 kids have applied for this, but to play in this, and that was lovely. And it also helped me because I had my own children at home watching as well. And sometimes, very often, when I would be talking down into the monitor, I would be talking directly to my children, in which case it made my connection stronger than it would if I was just talking to a general mass of people. And then, of course, when we got to Aztec, we kind of introduced little things in Aztec that the kids would like. Yeah. For instance, I said, why don't we bury a conquistador's helmet in the sand, you know?
Yeah.
And so, you know, it's buried in the sand, and I trip over it, and I go, "Oh, look at this! So that's been left behind," you know. I make up a little story about it, which fascinated the children, because they feel that's, you know, that's real. And I had a little wooden snake, you know, those little snakes that you wind,
I know what you're on about.
Backwards and forwards. And we put a little bit of fishing line on it, you know, and I'm standing and it went over my foot. It's irrelevant, but it just, for the kids, it added that little bit of extra spice to the whole thing.
Yeah, it did.
Made it a more of a reality, or pretend reality anyway. I really enjoyed doing that program. The producers were terribly nice. The other thing was the food on the set was exceptionally good. I used to put on a couple of pounds, actually, by the time we'd finished them filming the 13 episodes.
So after talking about Crystal Maze a little bit, we'll get on to more of that a little later on. I wanted to rewind back a little bit. So you were born in England, you moved to New Zealand as a child, grew up in New Zealand, and then moved back to England in the 1960s to pursue an acting career, is that correct?
I think you might say that. I have actually, when I got on the boat to come back, I had no idea about where my life was going to go. In fact, I went to bed before we even set sail, because it didn't sail till about 11 o'clock at night. I went, put my head down, didn't even see it, you know, to cast off and head out into the ocean. When I wake up in the morning, we were at sea. But if they'd said, you know, if they come down and woken me up and said, actually, it's not leaving, you've got to get off, I would have got off with the same kind of indifference that I got on, because I was at that point in my life. I had no idea where I was headed and what was up. It was, you know, we get to us sometimes in our life when you were kind of like on a roundabout, looking for an exit. And we sort of mark time, don't we? Our life isn't going anywhere. We're just going around the roundabout, and then suddenly, you know, a signal comes up, and you go down that road, or fate takes you down that road off the roundabout. So I got to England 64. Stayed with my grandparents for a little while, and then went up to London in 65 and started writing horses and movies. I did 3 movies that year, and then at the end of that year, they decided to start a stunt register. In other words, you had to be on the stunt register if you wanted to continue doing what I was doing in the movies. And I didn't really want to become a stuntman. I wanted to be an actor because I saw the actors and they got treated better than the stuntmen. You know, people bought them cups of coffee and brushed their, you know, the fluff off their jackets and all the rest of it. So there we go. What was the original question? Because I feel as if I've, moved off some.
Oh, I said you moved back over here to pursue an acting career, basically.
I think I did. I think that's what I wanted, but I hadn't really. I don't think I'd actually said it out loud, even in my head. I used to pick up. I had a guitar in London when I first got here, and I used to walk around and knock on doors and say, "I write songs. Can I come and play them for you?" I went to HMV Records and turned up one morning about 10 o'clock in the morning. There was a receptionist behind the desk, and she said, "Can I help you?" And I said, "I'm a singer-songwriter. I wonder if I could sing some songs." And she said, "Pardon?" I said, "Well, it's HMV Records. I wonder if I could sing some songs." And she said, "Have you got an appointment?" I said, "No." She went, oh, and a man came in behind me. She said, "Oh, Dick," she went, "Dick, this young man, could you speak to this young man?" He said, "Yes, what's up?" And I told him the same thing. He said, "Well, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. But since you're here, come into the office." And I went to his office and I sang him some songs. And he said, when I said that doesn't happen this way, he said, very oddly, a young man came in not so long ago, about 6 months or so ago, and sang me a song. And now it's in the top 20, and it's called "Everyone's Gone to the Moon." It was Jonathan King.
Yeah. And
he said, I sent him off to a music publisher called Joe Roncaroni in Soho Square, and he said, "I'm going to do the same thing with you." I was very lucky because this man, Dick, his name was Dick Rowe, and he'd turned down the Beatles. And everybody said, "Well, you must." Everybody does that from time to time, gets it wrong. But you couldn't get it much more wrong than that, could you?
No, you couldn't. No.
And to bless him, he did actually go to the Beatles and said, "I did it. I made a huge mistake, didn't I?" And they went, "Yes, you did." He said, "You couldn't recommend another band, could you? That you like, that you would want to recommend." And he recommended the Rolling Stones. They recommended the Rolling Stones. So he did finally,
Yeah.
Clawed it did work out. Yes, clawed back. Quite right. He was a lovely man, and it was so there again. You don't wait for the phone to ring. Make the call is the answer, isn't it?
Definitely, yes. As I've found out with getting in contact with you.
Yes, exactly so. Because people can only say no.
Exactly.
And if you ask nicely, there's no, and they say no nicely, there's no problem, is there?
Yeah, no problem at all. No problem at all. But like you say, you've got many strings to your bow. Actor, writer, singer, and a TV presenter. A jack of all trades, basically.
Ooh,
you could say.
Renaissance man, I think. Jack of all trades. I don't know. I've just been very lucky, and I've been lucky to do what I want to do. And that's one of the greatest things in anybody's life is to have choice, and I've been very lucky that it is me that makes the choices. Sometimes they've been wrong, but that doesn't matter. There was still choice, as opposed to being driven to do something. And many of us are in that position. We'd love to do something else. We'd love to, fly away in our imagination and become whatever that idea is, but many of us don't have the opportunity to escape from the reality of our lives, which is looking after a family, paying the bills, and all the rest of it. So I'm particularly lucky. I think probably the luckiest person on the planet, quite frankly.
Possibly.
I think I am. I'm married to the most delightful human being. And my children love me. I have friends that love me, and I think that's the nicest thing of all, really. You can have all the money in the world, but if you don't have people who care about you, you have nothing. To be on your deathbed as you know, as rich as Croesus, lying on your deathbed, and nobody could give a fuck whether you live or die. You know, you've failed as a human being, haven't you? To be impoverished and to have the room full of people who fucking love you beyond belief, you've won.
Definitely, very wise words. Definitely. So, if you hadn't have left New Zealand back in, was it 1964? You said
64, yeah.
64. What do you think you would have ended up doing if you hadn't have gone down the path that you have?
I have no idea. I have no idea. I would have continued writing songs. I know that because I just love writing songs. I love singing. Singing is the purest art form in the world because it comes directly from you, and you don't need musicians behind you. You don't need a canvas. You don't need any instrumentation. You don't need anything else except your voice, and it's therefore the number one of all art forms, the purest art form, and I believe it began. Singing began and entered into the human consciousness from the simple fact of a mother cooing to a baby, maybe 200,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, 80,000 years ago. At some point, the mother picked up the child and went,
Yeah.
And I think that's where it came from. And it's such a lovely origin of an art form, isn't it? And singing is much easier than people believe. People want to sing and they don't have the confidence to do so, and they tell everybody that they're tone deaf and all the rest of it. Singing it's not about the chest, and it's not about the throat and the vocal cords. It's about the ear. All you're doing is making a sound. So when the sound leaves your body and comes up through your mouth, it must fall on your ear, your own ear, exactly the way you want it to fall on your ear, and that's all there is to singing. It's such a simple kind of realization. It's a bit like jumping into the swimming pool. You're afraid you'll drown, and then you jump in one day and you discover it's a wonderful medium. It's supportive, and you don't have to fight the water anymore because you're going to float. And and all that fear. It happened to me once in Morocco. I dived into a swimming pool. I have to say I had a jazz cigarette before I did this, and I dived into the swimming pool, and suddenly I realised how buoyant this water was, and I was free, and I was flying underwater, and all that. I used to fight the water. I was a good swimmer, but I was always fighting the water, and suddenly I realised I didn't have to do that anymore. And singing's very similar to that. You no longer have to fight to pitch or to perform. You don't have to perform. All you have to do is make a beautiful noise, and it's it's all over.
Well, that was quite a good explanation for that question. Thank you very much for that. So, of course, your one of the biggest successes in your life, I suppose, is Rocky Horror. I mean, it's weird, it's wonderful, it's flamboyant. How does a man think up of an idea like that for a musical? Where did all that come from?
Well, my son Linus had just been born, and I was sitting at home, and somebody asked me if I'd go and entertain the crew at EMI Studios for their Christmas party, and I was at that point in my life where I was having to decide, with Linus being born, whether I was going to stay in the world of show business or go back to New Zealand and get a proper job, because as far as I was concerned, I now had a responsibility, a real responsibility, and I know I wasn't going to be I didn't want to be one of those people, actors that did sit around at home getting one job a year, maybe one job every 2 years, because that's the harsh reality, waiting for the phone to ring again. So I thought what I'll do is I'll use this evening at EMI Studios, this Christmas show, to see if I can win these people over. They gave me, I was going to have about 15-20 minutes, so I cobbled some jokes together. and I wrote a song called Science Fiction Double Feature. And I said to them, that I know they make the films. These are the kinds of films I like. And when that was over, and it was a successful evening, and I went home much happier. A friend of mine was with me at the time, and I said, I think I'd like to write a musical about science fiction and B movies, all that stuff you watch late. We all watched late at night because television used to shut down about 12:30, 1 o'clock. In those days, and in that midnight hour, they used to show the crap movies, the B movies, which I loved, and it was only people like me, drunks and insomniacs, who were watching. That was their audience, so they didn't bother putting on good stuff. But I used to adore it, and I loved the unconscious humour, in unintended humour. In the B movies, especially sci-fi, people becoming very serious about and with heavy, clumsy lines, and the more serious they become, the clumsier the line, the funnier it became, and all that was part of my drive. And he said okay, and he went off to open up a recording studio, and in the meantime, I got a job at the Royal Court Theatre in a Sam Shepard play. With Jim Sharman, who directed Jesus Christ Superstar, and while I was there, I said, I'm writing this little musical that's amusing me. Perhaps they'd like to listen to it. By them, I mean Richard Hartley and Jim. Richard came along very reluctantly. We worked together now for over 45 years. Never had a crossword between us. He's a lovely, lovely man, and he came along very reluctantly, and I sang them Science Fiction Double Feature and a few other songs that I'd had in the drawer, and had a bit of dialogue and roughly the kind of characters. And Jim went away, and I got a phone call about 2 weeks later, and he said they've asked me to do another play at the Royal Court in the downstairs theatre, and I've said I will, as long as I can have 3 weeks fun upstairs before I do that. And we're on. He said, so I need another 20 pages by the end of the week and another 3 songs, blah, blah, blah. And it went from there. And the nice thing was that it all kind of happened without anybody saying, oh, this is going to be a hit or this is going to do that. It really was a little bit of juvenile fun. And as such, it had no portentousness. It wasn't heavy or pretentious or trying to be something. We never tried to sell this as a hit or anything else. We were really just having this 3 weeks fun, and that's what we thought we would have, 3 weeks. Because who was this bit of nonsense going to appeal to? 72 people a night. We got 62 people per night, because all we could get in the room. Absolutely sold out, packed out. The word of mouth was phenomenal. We extended for another 2 weeks, 5 weeks. We broke off for a 3-week period of time. Julie Covington, our first Janet, went to work at the National, and we recast the role of Janet, and then we moved down to the King's Road, and of course it ran for 7 years in London from that moment on. And within, another strange thing was that within a year we were allowed to make this movie. Not only were we allowed to make the movie, but the director of the stage show, Jim Sharman, was allowed to direct the movie. Not only that, we were all allowed to play our roles. Generally, when 20th Century Fox or Hollywood picks up a piece of work, they generally, the regional actors generally get lost in the shuffle because they want to recast it, to fit into the Hollywood scheme of things. Their insistence on an American couple for Brad and Janet was excellent, because by the time we went to shoot the movie, we'd all been doing the stage show for 18 months, and we knew our roles, and we knew who we were, and this other couple that came in, Barry Bostwick and Susan Sarandon, they came in as strangers, and so that couple really were entering into a world that already pre-existed before they entered, and it really added another dimension to it. And it was just delightful. It was the first movie for most of us, and once again we had such fun because we were we were like kids allowed to play, and it was fantastic.
And it really does show in the film. I mean, I'm going to be honest. I've never really liked musicals for some reason. I don't know. I've just never been a musicals person. But when I first watched Rocky Horror, the film version, maybe about the age of 12 or 13, I loved it. And so much so, not too long ago, I went on karaoke a bit drunk with a friend, and we both did Time Warp, and apparently my riff raff rendition was quite good.
Excellent. And you're modest as well. I like this.
Quite good, yeah. I mean, I had a bit to drink, so it might have been
Sang
terrible.
the shit out of it, didn't you?
Yeah, it did. Well, the pub loved it, so that's always the main thing. As long as people have a good time, and I guess that's what Rocky Horror's all about: just having a good time, having a laugh, and not really caring about things.
It really was intended. But one of the happy accidents, once again, is the fact that people again and again come up to me and say it was so important in their lives, especially if they've been going through gender problems or sexuality, going through puberty and all the rest of it, adolescence, and feeling lonely and marginalised, and they discover that they're not alone, and that's been lovely.
That kind of leads me on to my next question, really, because, like you said, the stage version came out in 1973, the original,
yes,
and the film in 75. Nothing like it had been done before, and obviously it's got a message of, it's okay to be what you want to be, really. And like you say, with, there are people out there who are struggling with sexuality and gender and that. Do you think that the film was ahead of its time, and it's kind of flew the flag a bit and said to society, it's okay to be different?
I think it was part of what was happening at that time. The word zeitgeist springs to mind. If the show had been a year earlier or a year later, who knows whether it would have had the same success. I think it came just at the right time. But it was the ball had already been started rolling with glam rock and the Stonewall movement, and especially in Great Britain, we have the very brave people putting their heads up over the parapet. Ian McKellen, in particular, he was a stalwart. He stood up and said, unapologetically, that I'm a gay man, and my role in life is to become accepted for what I am by default, and I will not be ashamed of what I am by default, And he was out there, and very bravely so, and so I can't take any credit for changing anything particularly, because that wasn't the intention of the show. It was all very happy that somehow or other it touched a nerve somewhere. One of the interesting things sociologically at the time was when Tim Curry strutted down the catwalk on his entrance of Sweet Transvestite. The audience, the women looked up, and in those days it was a little bit more of a grotesque circus in many ways. It wasn't quite as it's become. So the makeup was a little more garish, and it was and Tim's fishnets were always ripped, and in the crook of his elbow, he had a couple of plasters and blood running down, as if he'd jacked up some heroin or something rather. It was rough around the edges kind of stuff, but the women in the audience went, "Hello," and they found themselves attracted to this creature, which surprised them. And the other surprising thing was that the guys sitting next to them with the woman would look at Tim going down and go, "I see what you mean," and surprised themselves. The audience became surprised that they were attracted to this creature, and that was an interesting shift, because he should have been repellent, and he wasn't. He was one of those awful people that you hate to love or love to hate. Cruella de Vil to some extent.
I think we're always drawn to the baddies. I mean, you know, if he was repulsive, I don't think so many people would have dressed up as him, but so many people still continue to dress up as Frankenfurter and all the other characters as well.
Yeah.
So I said earlier on that I'm a huge fan of the Crystal Maze. I mean, I'm trying to think when I first started watching it. I wasn't old enough to see originally on Channel 4, unfortunately, but as you know, I'm sure it's never been off the telly. I think I started watching it about the late 90s. To show that I've pretty much bored all of my friends and my parents about they've had to sit and watch it over and over again, and they still continue to have to do it now. But how did that job come about? How did you make that transition from actor to TV presenter?
I was asked to go along and see these people to talk about it, and I'd been trying to raise some money for rehab for people. There's a hole in the net with rehab, people who want to get off the drugs or off whatever, the booze and drugs, and there's a hole in the net, people, because you can't get anybody into rehab unless they really want to go into rehab. That's the first step, and then when they've decided that they really want to, you know, turn their lives around, they can't because there isn't the money to support this change, and they have to apply for help from the government, and that takes time, and time isn't on the side of the addict because, you know, a week later the moment's passed and they're recidivistic. They're back and doing what they were doing before, and their lives are still spiraling downwards. So I thought I wanted to start a charity that would help have a pool of money, a kitty, if you were, that we could, the minute they said, I really want to go into rehab or want to change my life, we would have this money to give to them, and we would reclaim the money later on off the government. That was my naive thinking, and I thought, if I'm going out with a begging bowl, people need to know who I am. And people didn't know who I was. I had friends who'd been on television, seriously, good friends, and lots and lots of time on television. I'd be walking down the road with them, and people would recognise them. And I always thought, God, I'm so lucky. They've got to put up with that every day, you know. I'm so lucky. I'm still successful. I'm in the theatre. I'm making films, and I'm making money from Rocky and all the rest of it. I'm successful in this same world that they're in, but I have anonymity. Aren't I lucky? And when I realised, when I wanted to get the begging bowl out for this charity, that I needed to raise my profile. So that was what allowed me to make this decision, this choice, to turn my life into down a different road. Because I remember once I was sitting with my wife just before we went, you know, the first episodes came out. I said, you do understand that our lives are going to change, because we're no longer going to be able to sit in this restaurant, you know, without people nudging and looking over. And you know, because that's, once you're on television for 3 weeks in a row, you've been in their houses, they feel they know you. Once you've been doing it for 4 or 5 years, you know, it's really cemented. You're known, and your world is slightly different. And it was a rather challenging decision. That was the most challenging part of it. And so I went along, and we did I was supposed to do the Keys to Fort Boyard.
Yeah.
I wasn't supposed to be doing the Crystal Maze. That's what we were supposed to be doing, the English version of the Keys to Fort Boyard. And so we did. We went out to, strangely once again, to EMI Studios, and they had a mock-up kind of set, and scaffolding and whatnot, and I did a kind of pilot of what we might be doing, and whether or not I was the right person to be doing it. And on the first day, they dressed me up in some kind of medieval kind of looking shit and all the rest of it, and I ran around, and I was dreadful, and it was awful. I was so depressed. The producer came up to me and said, I need to speak to you in the dressing room after. Go and get changed, and I'll speak to you in the dressing room. I went into the dressing room, got changed, ran out the back door, got in the car, and I drove 40 miles home down into Surrey, and I got into the kitchen and shut the doors and whatnot, and I just taken off. About an hour later, so I knock on the door, and there's the producer at the door, and he said, came into the kitchen, he sat down, he said, what we did today was all wrong, wasn't it? He said, we hired you because we like you, Richard, and what we had today was we were making you somebody else. I want you to come in tomorrow, you pick your own clothes, and he said, I want you to come in tomorrow, and I want to see that smile that you have that's so wonderful and generates a lot of, people like that, and I like that and all the rest. So I just want you to come and be happy and be yourself. And so I dressed in a yellow shirt and yellow trousers and put a bit of makeup on and went out, and I had a completely a different day. And at the end of the day, Channel 4 were there. A little while later, they gave the thumbs up. They said, we're going to give you the budget, and it'll be going out at 8:30 in the autumn season on a Thursday night. It's got time slot and everything. And so they turned round to the French people who designed the ideas of the Crystal Maze and of Fort Boyard, and I said, well, that's great. They've got the time slot and everything, and they went, but the fort will not be ready. He said, but don't do that. But the fort would not be ready. I said, no, I've just spent £120,000 of my own money for that, that little pilot show, and they've accepted it. We've got the budget, we've got the time. You mustn't do this. And well, the fort would not be ready. So they flew to France and sat down for 2 days, and came up with the Crystal Maze. And it's the better show. And it's the better show simply because the keys to Fort Boyard was thought out too cleverly, and it was like a stodgy cake. And what we did with the Crystal Maze is we went to the same kitchen and all the same ingredients, and we made a souffle. And they had a stodgy cake, and we had a souffle, and it was that made it work, and to a large extent. Also, in the keys to Fort Boyard, at the end of the day, we're supposed to believe, suspend our disbelief and believe that, maybe they might get thrown to the fucking lions. That's never going to happen. We're never going to see a contestant thrown to the lions. So all that tension is missing because it ain't going to work that way. No. And they also the French people said we had to play the same games every week. So for 13 episodes, we're supposed to be, the audience is supposed to be seeing the same games. And our producer said, no, we're going to have different games. We might play them once or twice or 3 times, maybe at a push 4 times through the whole entire season. But that way, we keep introducing new games. People get excited. If they still see a game that's been played before, it'll only be played once or twice before, and that will enable them to go, oh, you've got to do that. And once again, the audience becomes complicit. They lock into it, and they're watching the players struggling, and at home there's a frustration the point of view, because they go, it's behind the door. For God's sake, it's behind the door. You know what I mean? Yeah. And it was rather good. And as I said before, it was a lovely, trouble-free. There wasn't a single person on the set that was a bother. You only need one, but a black hole. That's all you need. Just one person, doomy kind of black hole, mean-spirited or whatnot. It was long, long days. The crew used to get there about 6 in the morning. I'd turn up about 8 o'clock. And by 10 o'clock we'd turn over, and we'd be still turning over at 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. Freezing cold, always done in the winter time, for some reason or other. So you really didn't need any negative kind of characters or personality, to be involved with that. And there were, we're talking about 30 or 40 people on, running around, crew and fitters and electrics and all that sort of lighting. It was rather lovely.
And it really shone through on the programme, and the fact that so many people enjoy it. So, like you were on about earlier on about the ad-libbing and all that to the camera and everything, and the whole mumsy thing as well was completely just like something that you said and it stuck.
Exactly. So it was lovely. Sandra Karen. She was the sister of Alma Cogan, the very famous singer of the 50s, so a lovely lady, and she came along to play just the once. You know, that was going to be one or maybe twice, but in the series. But then the first time somebody went in, I had to give them some money to, you know, cross the palm of the gypsy, because that's what she was. She was just the gypsy, you know, you're not going to cross the gypsy palm with silver. And I said, "Oh, do be careful, my mumsy, won't you? She's had a little, you know, bit like that's too much of this last night, you know." And once I'd said she was mumsy, well, she had to stay, didn't she? And we played on that and kept, you know, ad-libbing a little bit more each time.
It worked really well, I think, and I think the thing that was also funny as well for the grown-ups and that is that it was quite obvious that the two of you were about the same age, really. But you know, to the kids, it was like, oh, you know, that really is his mum, and they really live there and make crystals and the games and everything.
Yes,
it was
they
good
did.
fun.
They did. I used to get lots of lovely letters from the kids. I was getting something like I had 20,000, 10 or 20,000 letters per season. Which I couldn't answer. That's I had to get my. I did a. It wasn't really fair to the people writing in, but I got a stereotypical letter and reproduced it and signed off. And my son did put all the envelopes together and licking and stamping and all the rest of it. It was difficult dealing with that, actually. I hadn't factored that into the change in my life either. But it was lovely, you know, to say. "Dear Richard O'Brien, I am writing to you." It was always a double T. Yeah. "I'm writing to you because you are a cool dude." And I used to get these lovely letters. Some of this I thought I used to keep the crystals down the end of the garden. Used to find them in the garden. It did fire their imaginations.
I think that's what the show was all about. It was very imaginative. It was different. It was, you know, it was an adventure, and there was nothing else like it at the time. And I don't think there have been shows that have tried to recreate that, but I don't think they've captured it. In fact, we did actually have Fort Boyard come to the UK a couple of years after. So in Crystal Maze, of course, you know, you had contestants on, and some of them weren't brilliant at the games. And as a viewer, it'd be shown at the telly, and trust me, I did numerous times. Did it used to wind you up as well when someone was being rubbish?
There was one incident particularly where the game was there was a room, oblong room, and running. It was split into two halves, but the half on the door was a space, and then there was some chicken wire in front of them, and behind the chicken wire there was a turntable. And in the chicken wire there was a little hole, and on the turntable, on the far side of the turntable, was a crystal, and you had to bring the turntable around to the hole in the chicken wire, so you could.
Yeah, I remember the game. Yeah.
Now the only way of getting that around was to what you had on the contestant side and on the floor in three pieces was a crank handle. You had to put the crank handle together, the three pieces, make the crank handle, stick it through the chicken wire into the little keyhole slot so you could turn the crank handle, and the turntable would revolve. It's not rocket science, but you know, it's time consuming. And what have I got to do? Oh, what's that on the floor over there? Oh, cool. We've got to put it together. Oh yeah, I've got to put it together. Now what do I do? Oh, there's a little hole over there. You can put it through there, and then slot over there. So that's the kind of way it works. But this girl went in, and she looked at the turntable. She looked at the crank handle in three pieces on the floor, and she went, oh, and picked up the three pieces and threw them over the chicken wire fence. And we all go, and what was that all about? It was the only time. It was the only time we did a game. We never we never allowed anybody to go back and have another go. But on that one particular occasion, we had to, because otherwise, what on earth was that all about?
There was some brilliant displays of intelligence.
They were under pressure, of course.
Definitely, yeah.
And not only that, not only under the pressure of playing the game, they're under the pressure of being on television.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
And they would say to me, I'd go up and meet the contestants the night before, because we were shooting it out on an aircraft hangar out of North Weald.
Yeah.
Right, 2 o'clock on the M25. And so I'd go up and meet the contestants and in fact have dinner with them, generally speaking. But the day before, the people who'd got the contestant would come to visit and they'd come up to me and they'd say, "Oh, you're going to have a lot of fun tomorrow, Richard. There's one chap. He's you're going to really spark off him. He's really funny and witty, And I'd meet them the night before, and we'd swap a few kind of jokes around the tea table, so that break down the kind of barrier between me and the contestants and make them feel really at home and at ease. But the next day, you see, there's a thing called red light fever, and you're suddenly on the set, and the lights come up, and you're ready to go rock and roll, and the red light goes up, and suddenly this person who's garrulous and kind of supposed to be a wit, got his hands clamped by his side and he's can hardly speak because of the fear, basically, and so that was a difficulty. But I used to stay with the contestants all day long. I never used to go and play and then go and sit in my caravan on my own, whatever. I made sure that I stayed with them all day long, so that I could say to them, that you made a dog's dinner of that. A child of 3 could have won that. You know what I mean? What the hell are you thinking about? I couldn't have said that if we didn't have that familiarity between us. That was essential, that we did have a familiarity, that there wasn't me and them. I was with them completely, but pretended not to be when I looked down into the lens and I was talking to the people at home. It was the audience and me. But I was very aware that I didn't want to have people who were just running around in a blind state. I wanted to be able to say, "Oh, for God's sakes, what the fuck were you thinking about?" You know what I mean? I couldn't use the F word, but I wanted to be able to say that to them without them becoming offended. Yeah, that was essential.
Yeah, I mean, there were some great moments. I mean, one in particular sticks in my mind, and it's been reposted on YouTube millions of times, watched millions of times over. There was a game where you had to put a jigsaw puzzle together, and there was a code on it, and then there was a massive grid of numbers on the wall, and you had to find the one with the code on it, and this guy couldn't find it, and I think it was U3, and everyone's screaming, U3, and you go, "It's U3, it's that one on the wall," and even the computer goes, U3, and I think you end up storming into the cell and showing him where the button is and going, "It's that one," which is a great moment. There
was a lot of freedom in that, actually. I was. And then the nice thing also, of course, is because we're pre-recording, is that you can go a little bit further because we know we always have the off switch, the edit button if we want to.
Yeah, definitely. So, doing the show, I mean, did you have a favourite zone out of the four?
I used to like Aztec simply because it was so freezing cold on the set. It was generally, freezing, and there was no heating in an aircraft hangar. We had all these big gas heaters blowing stuff around, but of course they would have to be shut off when you're turning over. And so, at least when we got to Aztec, it felt warmer because the lights were more yellow and bright, and we had the sand, and it seemed more summery. But I'd be talking to the people. You see the steam coming out of my mouth.
Yeah, I've noticed that. Yeah. Sometimes you take your jacket off and put sunglasses on, but really you were freezing the whole time.
Exactly so.
And was there a game that you loved, if you can remember a particular...
I can remember one game, but this is another interesting thing, because when the first season, they had 4 sources of games in-house to a very, very small degree. A place called Games Workshop that used to come up with ideas for games. Mensa, they approached that, and they'd have these people supplying games, and Games Workshop were fine for the first kind of season and second season, but then they said, actually, that we're no longer going to do. You've got to take all our games that you can't cherry pick anymore, because that's what we do. They said, that's a great game, that's a great game. We won't want that one, but they were putting in the effort, and they said, you've got to take all our ideas, otherwise you can't take any at all. And at the same time, because we've been doing the show for 2 seasons, we kind of knew what worked and what didn't work. and some of the games were purely televisual. It wasn't really so much about the game on the day for the player. It was about the game for the audience to be able to look at it and be able to work it out themselves, what's supposed to happen. That's called televisual. In other words, if they can't understand what's going on, they're going to lose interest. And all those factors were combined, and riggers and people working on the set would suddenly come up with a game, and they became rather interesting. For there was a little maze on 4 chords. It was a tray, basically a huge tray, with a maze in it and a ball in the maze. And it was suspended. It was each corner of this tray was suspended on 4 ropes, and these 4 ropes allowed you to. There was a lever which allowed you to turn the tray, tilt it in kind of like corner-wise directions, edgewise directions, and it was really, really beautiful, and it was so simple and so divine. It just put on 2 ropes. You were pulling 2 ropes, and you could manipulate the level and the angle of the tray and get the silver ball to run through it. I thought it was delicious.
I remember the
so
game.
Simple.
Yeah, it's a good game. Good game, that one. There's quite a few like that with mazes, actually. Balls, I seem to remember. And of course, the show was massively successful. For Channel 4, made you a household name.
We hit the 5 million mark. I think
5 million?
season 2, but halfway through season 2 or a quarter way through season 2, we break that 5 million barrier.
I don't think there's many game shows that can claim that. Really.
I know. Also, I was asked to go up to the BBC. They wanted me to do something while we were doing Crystal Maze. Janet Street Porter asked me up, and of course they look at all these demographics of people that work in television. They have these books that have 9 o'clock, what's happening at 9 o'clock, right across the station, the different channels, and who's getting the audience. And she went, "Look at this, Richard." She said, "Look, 9 o'clock, the BBC 9 o'clock news. You start at 8:30. You inherit nothing. There's nothing on Channel 4 before you go. There are no viewers whatsoever. There are, but nothing really. And you come on and you pick up 1 million viewers. 8:30, 9:30. BBC News comes on at 9 o'clock. It's never happened before. Your audience figures improve during the BBC's 9 o'clock news. That has never ever happened before." I went, "Oh, I didn't know about this." It was astonishing.
It was, definitely. You did 4 series, and then you decided to call it a day.
Yes.
Why did you decide to do
I
that?
knew if I stayed there much longer, I wouldn't be allowed to be an actor too much. I was going to become a kind of television personality, and I didn't want to. I wanted to quit while I was still ahead, and I didn't want to wake up one day and they say, it's no longer pulling in the audience that we imagined, and we're going to move it to the afternoon, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I didn't want that to happen. There's no reason why it should, but there's no reason why it shouldn't have done either. And they wouldn't contract me for more than 1 season. I was always contracted 1 season at a time. And I said to them, you could turn around to me and say, "It's been great, Richard, but we're gonna recast, give them some new blood into it." And they said, "We wouldn't do that." I said, "No, but you couldn't you?" And they, "Well, no, we wouldn't do it." And I said, "No, but it might happen. It could happen. In which case, I want to be the one that's making the decision." And so I stopped doing it, and I went out. Left there. I went out to Australia, made a movie. I did 3 movies in a kind of row straight after that, which I don't think I would have been allowed to do if I'd stayed on. I think the time was over for me to be doing that on television.
Yeah, I suppose, what was it? It was 4 years, which might not seem a lot when you say 4 years, but I suppose it was a long time that you did it. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was on twice a week, wasn't it? They started repeating it because it went out at 8:30, and and the following week they'd put it on Tuesday for 6 o'clock or something on again for this. Because they realised that there was a big captive children's audience.
And I love that little sketch you did when you left, when you rode out the maze with Mumsy on a Harley Davidson. I think that was a stroke of genius. And you left a note for Ed on the table, something like "Don't forget to pay the milkman" or something like that. I remember that. That was good. So of course, like, you know, they cast Ed Tudor-Pole after you. Do you think he was a good choice as your replacement?
I think you're on a bit of a hiding to nothing, aren't you? Really, when you've got something, when you're taking over from somebody, it's always going to be difficult. The thing about Ed coming in, you see, he didn't have the luxury of being able to be there at the beginning and go through all the kinds of ups and downs and the discovery of what would work and what wouldn't work, and I was lucky to be part of that kind of creative process at the beginning, but it was already kind of not particularly set in stone, but you know, the formula was there, and he had to kind of just slot into that, which isn't as comforting as it might be. He had a bit of a struggle with that, I think. Truthfully. Yeah,
I think he did a good job. Unfortunately, he finished.
He's a lovely eccentric human being.
Yeah, he is. Yeah. I did see one of his.
Forgive me, but you are. I'm sorry, Ed. You are a lovely eccentric human being.
I did see one of his live shows a few years ago, and it was fantastic. He's what you say, eccentric and wonderful. But sadly, the show ended 2 series later, so I don't think he really got a fair crack of the whip, really, unfortunately. But there we go. And he actually played Riff Raff, didn't he, at one point in the live version of the show of Rocky Horror.
Yes.
So that's a bit of a coincidence. I wonder if that might have had something to do with the casting.
I have no idea. But people have often said to me, "Why did you get cast?" And I said, I think it's because I don't know why they even thought about me.
Yeah.
To ask me along to, I don't know where that thought came from, because all I'd done was in theatre and film. They didn't really know me, and I don't know how my name got into the original kind of thought of who might do the show. And I said, well, I think it's a bit like Dungeons and Dragons, and they wanted a dungeon master, and that way I can see why they might have come my way. And I said that to the producers, and they said, no, nothing to do with that whatsoever. And I said, well, why? And I don't think they gave me a clear answer. No, it's hard, isn't it?
Definitely. And actually, you saying that, didn't you appear in a Dungeons and Dragons film and play a maze master in it?
I think I did. Yes, I think
you did.
I did, yes.
Oh dear. And I mean, of course, the show's recently been revived. They did a one-off special with Stephen Merchant. I loved your cameo in that when you played the computer.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Well, it was it was just nice to be there, wasn't it? But
yeah, I don't think they could have done it without having a little nod to the past, really.
No.
With it. And it's come back as a full series now. I'm sure you're aware, with Richard Ayoade. Have you seen the new one at all?
I've seen one of them. My feeling is, and I don't mean to. I hope I don't mean to be denigrating or cold, a wet flannel or whatever. We had the luxury, once again, of not being confined by health and safety. Today they have health and safety. The world has health and safety. You can no longer employ a painter to paint your house, and he gets to bring a ladder along. There's scaffolding has to go into place.
Yeah.
Harnessing, hard hats, all the rest of it, and that's all over the world. And what we had, I think we wouldn't be allowed to do the show that we were doing. We have people on a revolving pole going over water, slipping off the pole and hitting their hip on the side of the pole. It was precarious and dangerous, but it gave it an edge, and it was a faster show as a result of that, because we weren't confined by safety issues. And I think I think to some extent from my point of view, that's hampered the show, because it was just rollicking and a bit more free.
Yeah, I'd agree with you on that one. Definitely. So with a new series being made, the live experiences as well, the one in London, the one in Manchester, the old ones are still being repeated constantly on Challenge, as there have been since the show originally ended. Why do you think the show is so popular for a game show, and why it has such a cult following?
I think it's because you can pick up anywhere you like with the show, and it's not a result of You couldn't do it with a pub quiz show, which most of them are. Doesn't matter what they are. It's kind of like question shows, and because once you've heard the answer and you've seen the answer and you know the answer, it becomes less interesting. With the Crystal Maze, as it was a little bit more disjointed than that. It didn't rely on an answer or knowledge. It depended upon going in to win this game and getting out alive, basically, wasn't it? I think it's that. And if new generations, new people watch it, it's as I say, if it was just a quiz show, we can't keep watching the same old quiz show all the time, and because we know the outcome. With the Crystal Maze, you're watching something a little bit more ragged than that, and a little bit more kind of immediate in some way, and it maintains its immediacy through several viewings, I think, somehow or other. I don't know. I'm guessing, actually.
I mean, from my own personal experience, I've watched the old ones probably more than once, all of them. That probably sounds a bit sad, actually, but I've always enjoyed it. I just remember as a little kid loving it. I've grown up and love it. It's fun, and that's what it's about. And it is funny to watch people fall over. It's a bit sadistic, really, but you and Ed both did a great job, keeping it all together and making it an enjoyable watch. So.
Yeah, I really loved it. I was given so much freedom.
I think that's what helped as well.
I think it did, and I tried to be inventive with the humour, and push the envelope sometimes. I mean, for instance, I turned to the camera with someone going, right, you've got a schoolboy's chance in Alcatraz, which is, when you think about it, it's a terribly rude line, isn't it? And I'd say to them, "You're going to cut that." No, we'll keep that in.
They kept
it was the little, So there was something for the adults and the kids as well.
Yeah, and there was the excitement music as well, the harmonica playing, which everyone seems to remember. Whenever the show's ever spoofed in comedies, there's always the harmonica comes out in any of them. So in more recent years, what have you been up to? I mean, I understand you've moved back to New Zealand now.
Yes, we're fully domiciled in New Zealand now, and happily so. I've been doing a programme out there called the DNA Detectives, where we take people's DNA and then we discover the various couple of groups and that they have in their DNA makeup, and then we send them around the world to meet family that they've never heard of. May have a great grandfather in common, shared. One person, we send them back right to a place in Europe where we discovered his Neanderthal roots. And that's another interesting thing. Many Europeans, myself included, have Neanderthal signatures in our DNA makeup, which is rather lovely because it means I'm a Darwinist, unashamed, unapologetic Darwinist. We came out of Africa 60, 70, 80,000 years ago, whenever, and they moved out about 20,000 years, 30,000 years before we did, and settled in Europe. And when we got up, the Homo sapiens got up into Europe, they crossbred with Neanderthals. Now, it's with the same family, but a separate species. Generally, when that happens, you put a lion and a tiger together, you get a liger. The offspring are infertile. But with Neanderthal and Homo sapien, the offspring were obviously fertile, because right across Europe, I have a 2.006% Neanderthal markings. And I loved that. I was able to meet some lovely people. Most of the people we were selected in New Zealand had some sort of celebrity kind of background. And in the last series, a young girl came on who was a politician named Jacinda Ardern, and we sent Jacinda around the world. Well, when she came back, she was the Prime Minister of New Zealand, which she is today. And that, you see, that was lovely. So I've had a lot of fun, and it's not work. It's enjoyment.
Yeah. Very, very lucky indeed. And is life treating you well?
Oh, very much so. We live down a dead end road, so there's no through traffic, and we look out over the top end of the Tauranga Harbour. It's a demi-paradise as far as I'm concerned. We lock the front gate and we say, "Fuck off, world."
I guess you've earned it really over the years.
I don't know whether I've earned anything really. I just once again I say I am the luckiest person in the world, and I never take that for granted.
Never, no. Well, Richard, it's been a pleasure chatting to you. Thank you so much.
My great pleasure. Thank you, Jack.